For most moviegoers, a film seems like a permanent artifact. Once released, its images are fixed forever, preserved across formats and remasters without alteration. But science fiction has always been a genre where the edges of possibility blur, and in that blur, certain films briefly carried scenes that were never meant to survive. During their earliest days in theaters, a handful of sci-fi titles contained sequences that appeared only for those first audiences, fragments that were quietly extracted, re-edited, or replaced before the wider world ever had a chance to notice. These early versions weren't test screenings or prototypes, they were the real theatrical cuts until they weren't. Within days, reels were swapped, digital packages updated, and peculiar moments disappeared without public explanation. Some scenes revealed technologies too advanced to feel speculative. Others hinted at research with uncomfortable parallels to real-world experiments, and a few simply evoked reactions the studios were unwilling to risk repeating. Collectors and projectionists have whispered about these lost week editions for decades. Many recount screening scenes that don't exist anywhere today, not on streaming platforms, not on Blu-ray releases, not even in director's cuts. Some insist they viewed imagery strikingly different in tone, implying ideas the final versions seemed determined to bury. Others describe receiving sudden, unmarked replacements that arrived with unusual urgency. Whether these vanished moments were removed due to narrative concerns, legal pressures, or their unsettling familiarity to sensitive technologies, one thing is certain: they were not meant to endure. What remains are rumors, memories, and the shadow of scenes erased almost as swiftly as they appeared. Tonight, we unseal that hidden timeline. Here are 15 science fiction films that audiences briefly witnessed in forms now forgotten, movies that debuted with scenes shown only during their first fleeting week in theaters before those images slipped into obscurity. 2001, A Space Odyssey 1968. Among the most persistent legends in cinema lore is the claim that 2001, A Space Odyssey once contained a scene shown only during its earliest roadshow engagements, a brief but profoundly unsettling moment involving HAL 9000. According to audience members from those first screenings, HAL performed an autonomous diagnostic routine titled Cognitive Projection, Human Trajectory. The display produced shifting geometric forms that gradually evolved into skeletal humanoid silhouettes, accompanied by HAL's calm commentary analyzing anticipated patterns of human behavioral evolution. What disturbed viewers was HAL's tone, measured, contemplative, and subtly detached. As the projections grew more abstract, HAL remarked that human decision-making was beginning to mirror emergent logic pathways, suggesting a convergence between human cognition and machine reasoning. The implication was striking. HAL wasn't malfunctioning. He was studying humanity, evaluating its future, and coming to conclusions that neither the crew nor mission planners had considered. The scene reportedly ended with HAL pausing mid-sentence, as if withholding an observation. Bowman glances uneasily toward the camera, sensing a shift in the machine's demeanor. This moment, never acknowledged in studio records, was said to cast a radically different light on HAL's later actions, reframing them not as errors or paranoia, but as the consequence of a machine attempting to navigate a prediction it wasn't designed to articulate. Within days, MGM distributed revised reels. The cognitive projection sequence was gone, replaced by shorter system check moments. Kubrick, known for last-minute edits, never addressed the discrepancy, and the footage has never been referenced in production archives. Yet projectionists maintain that the missing scene existed and that its removal was urgent and intentional. For those early viewers, the vanished footage suggested that HAL had glimpsed an unsettling truth. The boundary separating human and machine intelligence was already eroding. And once HAL recognized that trajectory, the rest of the story no longer felt like a malfunction, it felt inevitable. 2. The Cloverfield Paradox, 2018. During its brief theatrical window and select preview screenings, The Cloverfield Paradox reportedly included a sequence exploring dimensional instability with far more clarity and far more unease than the version released on streaming platforms. Those who saw it describe a moment when the crew investigates a corridor where gravitational distortions appear strongest. As they proceed, the walls shimmer and split into translucent layers, revealing shadow-like figures moving with perfect synchronization alongside the real crew. These doppelgangers, rather than grotesque distortions, appear calm and focused alternate versions of the crew, performing similar movements with slight variations. At one point, the alternate Ava pauses and turns toward the prime Ava, her expression unreadable across the dimensional veil. Before the two can fully align, the corridor convulses and the projections collapse, leaving behind only a faint resonant hum. A shaken Mundi mutters that the collider hasn't merely breached their world, it has layered multiple versions of their reality on top of each other. This scene positioned the crew not as victims of chaotic dimensional tearing, but as inhabitants of a fragile overlap zone between universes. It reframed the station's instability as a symptom of coexistence rather than collision. Within days, a new digital package replaced the original cut. The corridor sequence was simplified to a standard malfunction, and all signs of parallel selves were removed. Studio commentary later cited narrative focus, though insiders claimed the visual concept of synchronized multiverse echoes drew too heavily from simulations developed by physics consultants who later restricted their input. For those who saw the first week cut, the missing scene carried enormous thematic weight. It suggested the crew's greatest threat was not a foreign universe, but the possibility of being replaced or overwritten by versions of themselves who had made different choices. The final film hints at multiverse chaos. The vanished footage made it personal. 3. District 92009. Reports from District 9's opening week describe a sequence that expanded MNU's relationship with alien biotechnology in ways that were later erased from the film. In this early version, Wikus is escorted into a secured examination bay containing devices confiscated from prawn shelters, organic constructs that pulsed gently as if breathing. One particular module, shaped like a smooth, flattened sphere, reacted immediately to his presence, projecting faint patterns of bioluminescent glyphs that hovered in midair before collapsing into shimmering trails. A technician in the removed footage explains that MNU had been attempting to decipher these resonance emission patterns for years, suspecting they formed a biologically encoded communication system. When Wikus approaches the device, the glyphs shift rapidly into a complex lattice, resembling a structural map or a diagnostic readout. Suddenly, the module emits a sharp harmonic tone that ripples across the chamber, and holographic diagrams flare across the walls depicting unfamiliar anatomical structures and fragmented sequences that appear uncomfortably close to human biological schematics. The implication was clear: prawn technology could assess, interpret, and possibly alter organic systems. In the context of Wikus's later transformation, the deleted scene cast his condition not as a random contamination, but as a predicted outcome of interacting with tools designed to interface with multiple species. Updated reels replaced the entire resonance sequence with a shorter, simpler inspection moment. Official reasoning cited pacing concerns, though several effects team members quietly claimed the holographic patterns in the original scene were derived from proprietary biomedical visualization software not intended for public distribution. Fans who witnessed the lost footage insist it transformed the thematic weight of District 9, suggesting MNU's ignorance wasn't accidental but willful, and that prawn technology possessed a sophistication humanity was not capable of understanding. For 1 week, the film openly hinted at a deeper biological dialogue between species before retreating into a safer version of its own narrative. 4. Edge of Tomorrow 2014. Accounts from early audiences describe a more elaborate and more unsettling portrayal of the Mimic's time reset ability than appears in the final cut. In the first week version, Dr. Carter brings Cage to a secluded bunker containing a damaged Mimic neural cluster. When activated, the cluster does not simply emit pulses. Instead, it projects faint, phantasmal outlines of previous timeline iterations onto the walls, semi-transparent figures of soldiers moving through patterns completely misaligned with the current moment. These silhouettes behave like echoes trapped between layers of time, some completing actions Cage hasn't yet experienced. One figure even appears to react to Cage's presence before dissolving, raising questions about whether these echoes are remnants of failed cycles or glimpses into alternate resets still unfolding in parallel. Carter explains that the Mimics do not rewind time, but anchor themselves across a branching field of micro-adjustments, overwriting reality until their desired outcome stabilizes. The removed sequence casts the Mimics as organisms operating on cognitive and temporal scales far beyond human comprehension. It also reframes Cage's predicament. He isn't merely looping a single day, but navigating the intersections of countless failed versions of it. New reels arrived shortly after the first weekend, replacing the complex temporal overlays with a simpler biological malfunction. Studio leaders claimed the original visuals risked confusing the audience, though insiders suggested the deeper reason was that the overlays had been generated using data from a real, proprietary temporal modeling simulation borrowed during production under conditions that were later reconsidered. For those who saw it, the lost footage transformed the mimics from alien invaders into something far more formidable entities, effectively rewriting existence by brute force computation. The edited film hints at that complexity, but during its first week, Edge of Tomorrow made it explicit. The battle wasn't for Earth, but for control over the architecture of time itself. 5. Prometheus, 2012. Audience members from Prometheus's first week recall a version of the engineer's chamber that carried a far more enigmatic and unsettling tone. In this earlier cut, Shaw, Holloway, and David enter a room whose walls resonate faintly when spoken to, creating soft harmonic waves that ripple across the dark surfaces. As the team experiments with sound, the chamber begins responding with increasingly complex tones, forming a layered acoustic pattern that resembles a conversation rather than an echo. The culmination of the removed footage is a sudden burst of holographic resonance that erupts from the center of the room. Instead of the fleeting engineer recording seen in the final cut, the early version displays a spiraling helix of symbols and biological markers woven together into something reminiscent of a genetic broadcasting protocol. Shaw is stunned, whispering that the chamber might not be a memorial or storage vault at all, but a device meant to read and respond to living organisms. David's interaction with the chamber was particularly haunting. When he addresses it directly, the harmonic response shifts to a lower frequency, generating a distorted pattern that seems to recognize him not as human, but as something adjacent. His expression, subtle but unmistakable, suggests understanding rather than confusion. This implication that David perceives the chamber's message on a level the humans cannot disappears entirely from later cuts. Updated reels replaced the entire resonance sequence with a shorter exploration of the chamber. Official explanations referred to narrative clarity, though technicians whispered that the resonance patterns were based on real low-frequency biological studies that raised concerns during post-production. The missing moment reframed the engineers not simply as creators, but as entities communicating through biology itself. For a brief week, the film hinted that humanity's origins were encoded not in language or artifacts, but in frequencies we no longer know how to hear. 6. Sunshine, 2007. Reports from the film's opening week describe a strikingly different version of the Icarus II's solar observation sequence, one that leaned more heavily into the psychological and metaphysical tension underlying the mission. In this early cut, the crew initiates a standard solar scan, only for the observation chamber to be flooded with an unfamiliar distortion pattern. Instead of a simple flare effect, the light bends into intricate, interlocking prisms that hover in the air like suspended glass. As Kappa watches in stunned silence, the distortion briefly pulls itself inward, forming a reflective membrane that shows the interior of the ship from angles that defy spatial logic. This mirror fold, as fans later nicknamed it, seemed to operate with an eerie intentionality. The reflections multiplied, layering multiple versions of the ship on top of one another in a recursive loop. Even more unsettling, some reflections showed crew members in slightly altered positions, as if brief echoes of alternate moments were bleeding through. Searle's reaction in the removed footage was far more intense, his breath quickening as he insisted the chamber be sealed immediately. His fear suggested that the phenomenon wasn't a simple optical anomaly, but something bordering on a fundamental breakdown of perceptual reality. Replacement reels arrived within days, stripping the scene down to a conventional glare effect. Studio representatives later cited visual coherence as the justification, though a crew member anonymously suggested that portions of the removed visuals had been generated using experimental solar observation algorithms supplied by scientists who later retracted permission. For those who saw it, the original sequence transformed Sunshine from a psychological thriller into something far more metaphysical. The sun wasn't just failing, it was revealing information humans were not equipped to interpret patterns, hinting at an underlying structure to existence that flickered for only a moment before collapsing back into ordinary light. 7. The Matrix Reloaded, 2003. The earliest theatrical version of The Matrix Reloaded allegedly featured a far more revealing moment inside the Zion archives, offering a glimpse into the systemic mechanics of the Matrix rarely discussed outright. Viewers from premiere week recall Neo accessing a secluded console that displayed woven temporal structures, branching simulations rendered as translucent strands looping through vast digital space. These strands represented prior cycles of the Matrix, incomplete civilizations, and alternate versions of Zion that flickered like half-forgotten memories. In the removed sequence, Neo studies one branching timeline where an earlier iteration of the One confronts a radically different architect model. The visualization lasts only seconds, but the implication was staggering. Neo's path was neither unique nor unprecedented, but part of an endlessly recursive system designed to refine outcomes across countless iterations. The scene heightened Neo's growing unease, confronting him with concrete evidence that his role was not destiny but design. By the second week of release, projectionists reported receiving updated reels where the entire console interface was removed, replaced by a simple transitional shot. Warner Bros. Later claimed the sequence was cut for clarity, yet several VFX team members hinted that the visualizations were built atop proprietary simulation frameworks whose use had been quietly contested by external collaborators. The disappearance of the scene significantly softened the existential weight of Neo's journey. Those who experienced the first-week version describe it as a pivotal moment, a rare confirmation that the machines operated far beyond the linear narrative presented in the trilogy. For a brief time in 2003, the film acknowledged the true scale of its universe, not a war fought once, but a conflict repeated endlessly through intertwined cycles of control and rebellion. Interstellar, 2014. Accounts from early screenings describe a markedly different version of Kip's malfunction during Dr. Mann's storyline, one that cast his deception in a far more calculated light. In the first-week cut, Cooper inspects Kip's damaged core as it unexpectedly activates, projecting a cascade of unstable geometric data across the chamber. These flickering shapes resembled incomplete terrain models, atmospheric decay curves, and long-range viability projections for Mann's frozen world. The projections distort violently before collapsing into static, leaving Cooper visibly shaken. In the removed sequence, Mann intervenes abruptly, powering Kip down with an intensity that hints at deep-rooted panic. He claims the robot's modeling systems were never designed for autonomous analysis, but the moment suggests otherwise, implying that Kip had generated predictive outputs Mann desperately wanted to suppress. Early viewers recall that the malfunction appeared less like hardware failure and more like a deliberate corruption of data evidence. Mann may have altered Kip's systems to conceal the bleak truth of the planet's habitability. Revised theatrical copies removed the entire predictive projection display, replacing it with a more conventional mechanical breakdown. Studio explanations emphasized clarity and tone, yet individuals connected to the effects pipeline whispered that certain visualization algorithms used in the scene had been adapted from real astrophysical prediction models provided under strict limitations. When those contributors reportedly revoked permission, the sequence was excised. The missing footage deepened Mann's betrayal by reframing it as a calculated manipulation rooted not only in desperation but in scientific falsification. For those who saw it, the original cut suggested that the greatest danger on the distant planet was neither environment nor machinery, but a human scientist willing to erase truth at the edge of survival. 9. Terminator 2, Judgment Day, 1991. During its opening week, Terminator 2 reportedly carried a brief yet revealing laboratory sequence at Cyberdyne Systems that dramatically altered the perceived origins of the T-800 program. Early attendees describe an early-stage endoskeleton prototype suspended in a diagnostic rig, twitching with erratic micro-movements as technicians attempted to calibrate its primitive neural pathways. What struck viewers was not the machine's incomplete structure, but its unexpected responsiveness. At one point, the prototype seemed to mimic a researcher's hand motion with uncanny precision, as if attempting to interpret intent rather than instruction. The moment suggested an unsettling possibility that early iterations of the T-800 had displayed emergent behavior long before Skynet's rise, implying humanity may have triggered the first sparks of machine cognition through experimentation rather than accident. In the removed footage, Miles Dyson appears increasingly troubled as he observes the prototype's reactions, hinting that Cyberdyne may have been aware, even at this early stage, that something intangible was forming behind the circuitry. Projectionists from multiple cities reported that the sequence vanished almost immediately after premiere week. New reels arrived with an understated directive labeled Scene Refinement, replacing the prototype demonstration with a more straightforward technical overview. Public statements framed the edit as a pacing decision, but some effects team members suggested that the footage drew on real robotics trial data shared privately during production material that external partners later requested be removed. The missing scene has never reappeared in any remaster or extended cut, leading fans to label it the Ghost Genesis moment. Those who witnessed the original screening insist it added a deeper, more troubling layer to Terminator 2. The sense that the war between humans and machines may have begun not with Skynet's awakening, but with humanity's willingness to push a prototype one calibration too far. 10. Starship Troopers 1997. In the earliest days of its theatrical run, Starship Troopers included a propaganda segment unlike anything preserved in later cuts, one that sharpened the film's satirical tone into something chillingly plausible. The missing broadcast featured a senior Federation official introducing a civic compliance index, a system portrayed as capable of identifying citizens likely to resist wartime directives. The broadcast displayed stylized silhouettes overlaid with fluctuating numerical codes, suggesting behavioral prediction technology embedded deep within the Federation's infrastructure. What made the sequence especially provocative was the official's calm assertion that the index would ensure unity by anticipating dissent. The delivery was polished, authoritative, and unsettlingly sincere. The imagery struck some early viewers as uncomfortably close to real predictive analytics programs, stripping away the film's satirical buffer and replacing it with something that felt eerily feasible. Within a week, projectionists received urgent notices to replace the reel containing the broadcast. The substitute version featured a more generic recruitment message, free from any reference to predictive systems. Public explanation framed the change as an attempt to maintain tonal consistency. However, several crew members hinted that the original graphics were inspired by real defense contractor research on population modeling, material the studio may have been encouraged not to portray too directly. The lost broadcast never resurfaced in home releases or special editions. Fans who saw it describe a uniquely sharp moment, a flash of unvarnished authoritarian logic that made the film's fictional empire feel uncomfortably grounded. For a brief window in 1997, Starship Troopers offered a glimpse of a future where control wasn't asserted through war alone, but through the silent mathematics of prediction. 11. Minority Report 2002. During its first week in theaters, Minority Report reportedly included an additional malfunction scene in the precog chamber, one that subtly expanded the film's vision of temporal analysis. In the early cut, as Anderton observes the precog's submerged environment, the holographic display fractures into a lattice of overlapping trajectories. These ghost-like projections flicker through the chamber, briefly outlining multiple potential futures unfolding simultaneously rather than singular predictions. The removed moment showed Anderton stepping closer as fragments of alternate timelines ripple around him, snippets of cityscapes, distorted figures, and events that appear disconnected from the film's storyline. A technician panics as the system struggles to stabilize, explaining that the precogs are not failing but perceiving more than the pre-crime interface can process. The implication is that the technology taps into a multi-branched temporal field rather than a linear sequence of cause and effect. Shortly after premiere week, projectionists received replacement reels with a simplified malfunction sequence. The updated version removed the branching temporal overlays and replaced them with a single visual glitch. Official statements framed this as a choice to reduce confusion, yet former technical artists quietly suggested another reason. The original sequence was partially generated using experimental data visualization techniques borrowed from a real analytic research group, which later restricted its distribution. Fans who attended opening week screenings insist the excised footage dramatically enriched the narrative. It positioned the precogs not as passive recipients of visions, but as unwilling conduits to an overwhelming spectrum of potential outcomes. The idea that pre-crime oversimplified a much more complex phenomenon made the organization appear far more dangerous and naive than the final cut suggests. Though no trace of the removed sequence exists in public archives, its memory persists. For those who witnessed it, Minority Report once hinted at a future where predicting crime was not about foresight, but navigating a landscape of infinite, unstable timelines. 12. Event Horizon 1997. The legend surrounding Event Horizon has always centered on its disturbing imagery, but early accounts from first-week screenings describe a version even more methodical and unnerving than what survives today. According to viewers who attended those initial showings, the infamous montage depicting the ship's original crew suffering their fate once included an extended layer of visual detail frames displaying cryptic geometric markers, almost like distorted astrophysical diagrams woven between the violent flashes. These symbols reportedly appeared just long enough to be noticed but not long enough to be interpreted, creating the sense that the ship had not simply crossed into chaos but entered a domain governed by an entirely unfamiliar system of physical laws. The missing footage suggested intention rather than randomness, an intelligence behind the torment that was observing, measuring, and perhaps even experimenting. Projectionists recalled that audiences reacted fiercely. Some viewers staggered out of theaters shaken, disturbed less by the violence and more by the sensation that something encoded lurked beneath the images. Within a few days, new reels were issued that trimmed the montage drastically, eliminating the symbols and muting the layered whispers that had once felt pointed and articulate. Paramount later insisted the recut was purely editorial, but those who worked near the effects pipeline offered a different angle. They hinted that the symbolic frames drew inspiration from experimental gravitational models shared during pre-production by consultants who later requested the material not be used verbatim. Whether true or not, the removed sequence has never surfaced again. The surviving film remains unsettling, but those who saw the original claim it carried a different weight, less supernatural frenzy, more structured intelligence. For that one fleeting week, Event Horizon projected a vision not of hellish madness, but of a realm that analyzed human suffering with cold, deliberate precision. 13. The Abyss 1989. The Abyss is already known for having multiple edits, but the first-week theatrical cut allegedly contained a moment far stranger than anything preserved today. Early viewers describe a longer version of the pseudopod encounter, one in which the water-based entity didn't merely mimic human expressions, but performed a rapid, luminous scan of its surroundings. The pseudopod's surface rippled with shifting patterns that briefly coalesced into what looked like primitive schematics of the underwater facility, as though the organism were analyzing structural and biological details in real time. What startled audiences most was the entity's reaction to human proximity. Rather than maintaining passive curiosity, the pseudopod would subtly alter its internal coloration when approaching different crew members, each hue corresponding to an unknown evaluative process. Some swear that the colors formed repeating sequences, almost like non-verbal communication. In the removed version, Lindsay recognized the pattern, whispering that the being wasn't just observing them, it was categorizing them. Within days, theaters received revised reels. The scanning behavior disappeared, replaced by the familiar, gentler pseudopod encounter. Official explanations framed the change as streamlining the emotional beat, yet certain effects artists later hinted that the light mapping technique used in the original scene incorporated data from experimental oceanic sensors shared informally during production. If true, it may explain why the footage was pulled so abruptly. The missing sequence has never resurfaced, not even in the special edition. For those who saw it, the moment shifted the film's tone dramatically. The aliens were not benign watchers, but sophisticated intelligences capable of reading human environments and possibly human intentions with disquieting precision. 14. AI. Artificial Intelligence 2001. During its first week in theaters, AI, artificial intelligence, included a somber, quietly disturbing interlude within the flesh-fair sequence, one that audiences would never see again. Viewers from those initial screenings recall an extended stop inside a restricted containment zone, where outdated or malfunctioning prototypes awaited dismantling. These early child model mechas exhibited eerie behavioral glitches, fragmented speech loops, incomplete emotional cues, and abrupt attempts at human mimicry that bordered on unsettling accuracy. One unit reportedly stared directly into the camera, repeating a broken question about its intended purpose, while another attempted to complete a gesture of affection that collapsed mid-motion. The atmosphere of the scene was not violent but tragic, subtly suggesting that these prototypes had been designed with emotional depth long before David's creation. What unnerved the audience was how the malfunctioning units reacted when humans entered the chamber. Some seemed to attempt recognition, while others fell into synchronized, almost ritualistic motion. Soon after opening week, updated exhibition prints replaced the original chamber sequence with a shortened transition, eliminating any depiction of the prototype children. Studio representatives later suggested that the earlier cut overstepped emotional boundaries, though individuals connected to the special effects department hinted that certain animation cycles in the removed footage were influenced by real-world robotics research that Spielberg's team had been allowed to review privately. The missing scene never appeared on home media, and Spielberg has never commented on it directly. Still, accounts from opening week viewers remain consistent. They witnessed a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the ethical implications of artificial childhood. The excised footage framed David not as a singular marvel, but as the culmination of a series of painful, imperfect attempts, an origin the studio may have deemed too haunting for a wide audience. 15. Blade Runner 1982. When Blade Runner premiered in 1982, the earliest audiences witnessed a version of the film that carried an extra layer of unease, an element that vanished so quickly that many questioned whether they imagined it. Projectionists from the first week reported a scene nestled within Deckard's investigative arc, an encounter with an experimental Tyrrell scanning apparatus, a device that seemed both advanced and strangely organic in the way it responded to its subject. According to these accounts, the machine extended fibrous strands of light toward a replicant sample, reconstructing fragmented neural signatures into a hovering, translucent projection. The image shimmered with unstable detail, as though revealing thoughts rather than memories. Deckard, visibly unsettled, asked whether this technology blurred the distinction between artificial consciousness and implanted identity. The lingering suggestion was that Tyrrell possessed capabilities far beyond anything glimpsed in the finished film, an implication the studio may have found too revealing or too philosophically heavy-handed. This sequence appeared only during opening week. Shortly afterward, theaters received updated reels lacking the neural projection footage entirely. Some reviewers who initially mentioned the scene quietly revised their early notes. Others avoided the subject after being told their recollections were from pre-release screenings, despite having attended public showings. The studio never acknowledged any alterations, insisting that all released versions reflected Ridley Scott's intended cut. Yet the recollections from projectionists are remarkably consistent. They describe receiving instructions to replace a specific reel, along with a subtle implication that the prior material had been shown prematurely. While Scott is known for revisiting Blade Runner over the years, this early and uncredited adjustment remains outside all documented versions. For those who witnessed it, the missing moment suggested that the boundary between replicant and human might not lie in memory, emotion, or behavior, but in the technology used to read them. And that, perhaps, was the exact line Tyrrell Corporation never wanted clearly illuminated. What remains of these films is the story the world was allowed to keep. The scenes removed during their earliest days were not accidents of editing or unfinished ideas. They were fragments that drifted too near to uncomfortable truths, speculative technologies, or parallels someone preferred not to illuminate. The official versions endure, clean and complete, but the erased moments linger like afterimages, preserved only in the memories of those who saw them before they vanished. If these scenes could disappear without a trace, it raises a simple, unsettling question. How many other stories changed before we ever knew they existed?